Gizit, Matikuna Bay and Dijnikas, Gigo Duadem, Ojibwa Nishtabe and Dao, KK Gitaganing, and Nunjaba. What I said was, good day. My name is Matigunabe, which is spirit of the tree. I come from the Fish clan. I'm from that Ojibwa nation, and I'm from that land of the old gardens up on the western end of the Upper Peninsula. And it's an honor to come and talk to you about something that is very, very important to the Anishinaabe people across the state of Michigan, and our effort to revive and bring back this sacred gift. And so what my co-presenter and I are going to be talking about today is what this means to us and some of the conditions that it grows. And so, Art.
Buju, Gichi Anakudkwe, Indigenakas, Waberjeji Boyd, Dodem, Jibwe Nishnabe, Queno Focus Nordathaus, and Italia, Bawating, and Dojaba. What I said is my name is Great Cloud Woman. I'm also known as Courtney, and I descend from not only the Martin clan, but also the Boyd clan of Scotland, as well as being a descendant from many places throughout Europe, including Scandinavia and Italy. So yeah, like Roger said, we're here to talk about rice and hopefully spur your interest on it. So. So this is
this picture here is a picture of one of my sponsors and one of my teachers. I had several teachers. When it came to me learning about this sacred gift, this gentleman here, Donnie Dowd, helped me get into the Medewan Lodge. And once I was in the Medewan Lodge, a lot more information was shared about how this gift was so important to the people across Michigan. And I also have another mentor that taught me a whole lot about the restoration efforts.
And one of the reasons that I like to start out with this picture is that in this photo, we are seeding out the rice. And this is the beginning of the life and how important it is to connect with the land, how important it is to connect with the water, and being there with the rice from start to finish through its whole life is a great teacher and reflection for us in how we grow in our lives.
So what we're going to talk about in this presentation is actually what is wild rice. A lot of people are not aware that wild rice was really a dominant crop across the whole Midwest, or should I say the Great Lakes Basin. You're gonna learn about some of the cultural, ecological, and spiritual significance to the Anishinaabe people of the Three Fires people across the Great Lakes Basin. Some of the nutritional facts, historical and present day locations of some of the rice beds that are still remaining in Michigan, and why we actually should care about wild rice. And in closing, we would like to ask you to help in the restoration effort, and more so probably in the monitoring and making aware of the resource. And one of the things is the indigenous people refer to this wild rice as Manoomin. And in the Ojibwa language, it means good berry or good seed. And it comes back from, goes back to our, what we call the migration story. Through the migration story of how it came to be and why we actually respect it. A lot of the people today misunderstand that this resource, or what wild rice is a weed. The wild rice is a great teacher and a mirror for us as a people, and it was important to our health, to our home life, our spirituality. It was very the very survival and substance of how we as a people were actually up on the mouth of the St. Lawrence Seaway, and we actually moved from there and moved up in, like in this picture here, about, if you look at the western end of Lake Superior, you can see the arrows there at number 7. Our migration stopped at number 7, which was Madeline Island, and that was the place that was the center of all the fur trade later on. But as we were told to leave the mouth of the St. Lawrence Seaway by 7 prophecies, and the first and third prophecies are very important to the telling of the story. The first prophecy said that, and the spirits foreseeing that the colonizers are going to come across that big water, and told us that we needed to leave, because if we didn't leave, we were going to be facing death and destruction. And the third prophet or prophecy says that we would follow that Migashel, which is important to the Medewan people. We would follow that path and lead us. The Migas would lead us, and we would follow that Migas until we come to that place where that food that grows on the water. And as we moved westward and through the Great Lakes, we found this food that grows on the water. So with us leaving and finding this food that grows on the water, and finding our new home, we fulfill that first and third prophecy, and that's why we are here today. And there's also another story about Turtle Island, and if you looked at North America, that heart of that turtle is this Great Lakes Basin, and this Great Lakes Basin is the only place where these forms of wild rice grow. And so it was an indication of where our new home will be.
So like we said before, the rice itself is a mirror for the stages of our lives, and is a helper in allowing us to understand our connection to the cycles of our life, as well as the connection to the cycles of life itself all around us. And I love this slide because if you look at the life of man, it starts at the very beginning with that seed. And Manoomin is that seed, or the good berry. And in the picture, you can see it has the same shape. With that rice, the rice itself is inside a hull or a husk, and there's a long tail to it, just like the seed of man. There's a kind of a head area and a long tail to it. And that goes down deep into the mother. And at the second stage, you can see now that life begins to grow. And as life is growing, it's inside the waters of the mother, and how important that water is, because water is life and water is where all life comes from. So the beginning stages of the wild rice from that sprout, just like the beginning stages of us as a sprout, we're growing inside the mother, inside the waters of life. And it's important that the mother be protected at that time, which is why it's important that the rice be protected at that time as well, that we have our role where we are protecting the rice beds. We're taking care of the mother so that she can successfully bring into the world new life. And that's what you then see in the following picture, is the new life that comes. And for us as man, when we come out, we finally go from that world of water into that world of air. And that's exactly what the rice does. It goes from a world of water in its floating leaf stage, sprouting out into the air. And that's a completely different world. So we've learned one way of being and have to embrace a completely different way of being. And how fragile a newborn baby is. When you go out into the rice beds during that floating leaf stage, during when it's sprouting out, you really don't want to be going through there. You don't want to have paddles through there. You don't want to do anything that's going to damage that little small beginning life, because it's so fragile and it can be knocked over easily. If the plant gets knocked over, it's not going to reach its full potential. And in that last picture, you can see the full potential of the rice. You can see that it's flowering out. And the reason I have under the life of man a picture of both me and Roger is because it's a balance. There's a feminine and a masculine balance. And in the rice plant, there's a female and a male part to the plant. In this picture, you're kind of seeing the male portion of the plant, and the female will sprout up above that. I'm sure we'll talk more about that later, but there is a balance to this life, and there's forever changing that happens in this life. And we can see that so clearly through the stages of our own lives. And if we can reach out from our own lives into the world of the plants, we begin to understand ourselves more, and thus begin to understand the world more. And that, I think, is the beginning of a state of harmony for us all. Here you can see this photo has a variety of different rice plants in it. And the reason this is titled family is because, like I was saying, if we can understand the connection, we can understand that we're all family. Here in Michigan and Wisconsin, this kind of Midwest region, we have two types of rice. We have Zinnia aquatica and Zizenia aquatica and Zizenia palustris, and that's the river rice versus the lake rice. But they're all family. They've adapted to different surroundings. They've adapted to different life or ecosystems or places of living, just like we do as people. We adapt to different spaces of living, but we bring with us something different. And in this photo, there's two different types of wild rice that grow here. And then there's some brown rice and some white rice. And understanding that all of this rice is family. This is all rice. It has nutrient value, and each one has a different nutrient value. And then each type of rice is in a region. It's with a certain group of people or peoples, and its value is not only in the land, but it's in the people who are there. And for us as Anishinaabe people, the significance of the rice that's here is not only food value, but is ceremonial value. It's given as offerings, as gifts, as trade, as medicine. The rice is key to everything that we do and is one of our family members.
You can look at this chart here, and you can look at, as in the previous slide, between the white rice, the brown rice, and the wild rice. And you can look at the advantage of the wild rice, which is actually, grown and more of an organic type. Well, it's not cultivated. A lot of the white and brown rice are cultivated rice, and there are a lot of things done to those plants when they're growing. Whereas the wild rice, when it grows in the natural environment, either in a river system or in a lake system, whichever body of water that it grows in, it's become to be known as a keystone species in that habitat. And one of the things about wild rice is because it grows in the Great Lakes water or Great Lakes Basin, and is, the freshest water in the world. And it actually only grows in the Great Lakes Basin. It's been transported and tried to be transplanted in other areas, but it doesn't do well. I mean, I guess it'll grow, but it doesn't grow well. But it it was also important in our migration story because for subsistence living, as Courtney said, we have to live in balance. And so that was one of the things we came to honor, was the fact that it wasn't just for us, the two-legged. It was for those swimmers. It was for those winged ones. It was for those four-legged ones. And so the plant provides shelter for the swimmers. And so the balance in that habitat was very important, because if there was wild rice, there were a lot of other things. There was beaver, there was muskrat, there was fish, there were ducks, there were geese, there was all these things that would bring and provide for us as people in subsistence living. And the seeds were nutritious and gave the winged ones the ability to migrate to the south. And so, as Courtney said in the beginning, water is life, and the roots, and as it grows, provided nurseries and protection for those swimmers in their new life. And so when it becomes a keystone species, it is basically, it's been said that wild rice is to the Anishinaabe people as the canary is to those coal farmers or coal miners, where they put that canary bird in their work environment. And as long as that bird is singing, it's safe and providing. Same as with Manoomin. As long as there is Manoomin there, the water is clear, the water is good, it provides. It's a good place to live and to live in the balance.
Yeah, and understanding too, with it being part of the ecological system, a lot of times we think about agriculture as monocropping in its own space, and it is for food for people, or it is for food for cows, or whatever it is. But realizing that there's a way of existing with plants, with the environment, with the ecosystem, where everyone thrives, is something that I think is important for us as people to remember and to engage in. So caring for the entire ecosystem and taking those cues from nature and going, oh, okay, Manoomin's here, this is clean water, or, oh, the fish are disappearing in this area, why are they disappearing? Because all of them are indicators of something. And if we can learn the language of the animals, of when they're there, when they're not, language of the plants, when they're there, when they're not, we can move forward with crops and food in a much different way.
So the habitat that is required, is the wild rice grows, best in water that is, 6 inches to 3 feet of water. And the, the water that it has to be done is, it has to be a clear flowing water, that is more or less constant in the early stages. And the clear flowing water helps maintain the clarity and reduces the turbidity, because one of the things that it requires to grow, is to receive that sunlight from that grandfather's sun. Um, the water should fluctuate a little bit because it helps, uh, some of the native competition or plants of the native species. It kind of, eliminates some of those, and so the water clarity, and actually the flowing water actually also keeps the temperatures down. And when the temperatures are down, to dissolve the oxygen in that water is great. And, um, those plants also require the oxygen. And so, the fluctuations, um, give very little competitive vegetation so the plant can grow. And it's just like when you go out and you weed your garden, you take those weeds out so that they're not taking that nutritional value, and so that your target, resource is going to be able to grow. And again, the minimum shade is because it requires enormous amounts of sunlight. So even when you plant it, we usually plant it into the northern edges and the western edges of the waterways, so that those plants receive that early morning sunlight as that sun rises up in the east. And the other thing is, that it requires is a very, very soft, bottom, because as it starts to grow early on, it only has like a taproot, and then it builds a secondary support system so that plant can stand up. And so that usually it's very, very organic and has a lot of nutrients so that it can grow fast and quickly. Um, and it can be, replenished, because as this, plant grows, one of the things we haven't said is that this is an annual plant. It's not, a perennial plant. So the, uh, survival and subsistence of this plant, is very, very dependent on what we call a seed bank. And that seed bank also, remains in this black or organic mucky soil, um, over the winter, because that's actually when it starts to germinate.
As Roger was saying, there's so many components to the land that or waterways that it requires, to be healthy, to grow large and be nutritious for not only us, but all those other creatures. But as we know here in Michigan, there's a lot of threats to all of the waterways. There's silt buildup from dams. There's man-made ditches and drainage. There's different qualities of the water, and that is changing every day based on what water is flowing through. In addition to climate change, there's the human impact of runoff, from the roads, from chemical use. There's a lot of chemical use throughout Michigan, especially in well, I want to say just lower Michigan, but honestly, it's a little bit everywhere. We all have different issues in the water. And then the state of Michigan was used for logging for such a long time as well. And so the waterways themselves have had damage for centuries that have changed the way the water flows, how the water flows, the value of the soil. And these are things that we need to be aware of. In addition to that, there's the misunderstanding of what wild rice is. So people who live on lakes or along rivers, they want to be able to see, they want to be able to use their boats. They're just going out, they could be cutting it down, they could be chemically treating it, and that affects the water, but it's so they can see or ride their boat, and I want people to ride their boats. I want people to enjoy the water. I live here as well, and I enjoy it a lot. But we have to be mindful of the fact that if we're given food right outside our door and we ignore it or cut it down or put chemicals into it, that is a way of living that's just ungrateful, and that's not something that I think we should be doing when the earth is providing for us, especially like Roger said, in this Great Lakes basin, this wild rice in its various forms is being given to us as a gift. And if we can spread the knowledge of what it is and where it is and how valuable it is, then maybe we could look at it a little bit differently and start to look at the other plants a little bit differently, because the natural vegetation in a lot of areas is actually rich in medicine and food. It's just not everybody knows what it is. And I think that's one of the reasons that we try to speak for wild rice and to get this information out there, is to help people to understand the value of the plants that are growing in their area.
So here's some pictures that are taken out of a book written by a dear friend of mine, by Barb Barton. It's Manoomin, the story of wild rice in Michigan. And early on, you can see when it's with the historical sites that a lot of the existing wild rice beds that were most recognized and charted were from a lot of it was on the coastal regions of the Great Lakes. There were a lot of rice beds on the internal part of the state, inland. But for the most part, the coastal regions were for for wild rice. But where with the logging and everything, and the damages to a lot of the areas that, especially for exportation of lumber and also the mining and a lot of other things, a lot of that rice disappeared from those coastal regions into now where a lot of the restoration efforts have been more successful on the inland waterways, whether they be rivers or streams, because a lot of the coastal regions actually has also been um, prepared for harbors, marinas, a lot of other things. And as Courtney said, they really don't want this rice or just grass growing up right next up to the shoreline and everything else. We are fighting that also on the inland waterways as well, even in our current restoration efforts. But this wild rice, these two pictures show that wild rice is returning to the state of Michigan. There is a need for some of the age of federal and state agencies to recognize this and help the tribal communities protect this resource, especially their restoration efforts. And the tribes are doing a lot of education and outreach to try to bring an awareness to the general public, how important that not only to the tribal communities, but to the state of Michigan itself and all of its residents. Here's a picture of the other mentor that I had in the upper left-hand corner, and this is Nagana. She's my uncle, and in not only helping me go to the Medeiwan Lodge, this gentleman would tell me stories about when he was a young man, and on our lake, Lac Vieux Desert, where we could actually drink that water out of the lake. And that rice was good. It was, I mean, there was an abundance of wild rice. And then as we started, like here, it says 1800 to 1937. In the late 1800s and 1940s is when the lumber industry started coming into Michigan and started building these dams. And so when they built a dam on the outlet of Lac Vieux Desert, it actually destroyed our wild rice in the from 1940s to the 1970s. Our wild rice totally disappeared. We didn't even have any remnant strains. So then in the 1990s, with the help of several other federal agencies and some state agencies, as well as the Wisconsin and Michigan DNR, we started to recognize that we needed to restore and revive this important resource. And so it was done. And then we had to go into a fight with the Wisconsin Valley Improvement Company to lower the water levels so that the rice would grow. And so in the 2000, we had done a lot of efforts to protect it. One is we fought to do a traditional cultural property, which was very significant because it was done on a restored bed, but the restored bed was done on a traditional bed. And that was the reason that our community was there. And so right now we're still doing the restoration efforts, and now we're working on the means to protect the successes that we have attained across the state of Michigan. And so here's a couple of pictures of when we did it. When we actually won our lawsuit against Wisconsin Valley and actually had a maximum level for the lake itself because of the dam. This one in 2002, we had been actually attempting to grow wild rice and a return in Rice Bay. But after they lowered the water in 2002, you can see in 2007 the great success that we had when you compare just those years of seeding and everything. So, but even in those, they didn't come without hurdles and some people that misunderstood and didn't want that to grow in the lake itself.
So as we're moving forward and thinking about wild rice and thinking about, agriculture throughout the state, there's always things that are happening. I think there was an attempt to pass a bill that would make wild rice a Michigan state grain. However, I don't know the standing of that currently. And we're always out there trying to implement a way of practice with the rice that is going to be respectful, that's going to be able to preserve the rice for generations to come. With any crop, we don't want it to be genetically modified. We don't want it to become a paddy crop. As Roger had said before, when you're looking at the values of the different rices and what they're bringing to the table, generally those paddy rices don't have the natural flux or higher percentages of nutrient value to them because they're not in a natural environment. They're not in their wild environment, if you will. That keeping the rice in its habitat, both in the rivers and in the lakes, is key and important to this being or this crop, because that's where it gets its flavor. That's where it gets its nutrients. That's where it thrives. And so we don't want to have the genetic modifications. We don't want paddy rice. We want to have sustainable harvesting practices. And Roger can speak more to it, but when you have a rice bed, you have someone who's in charge of it. You have someone who's looking out for it. And that's what we want moving forward. It's the same as with a cornfield. You've got a farmer in charge of that field. It's not just everybody's going to go into that field and take whatever they want whenever they want. And if they did, that would be extremely detrimental to the farmer, right? But in this case, we want things that aren't detrimental to the environment.
Here are some sources that you can look at and try to learn more about about wild rice in the state of Michigan. One of the best things is to do is that book Manoomin there, Story of Wild Rice in Michigan. It talks about the importance of what we are sharing here today. It has a lot of the pictures. There's a lot of research. There's also, you can go to an organization now that is moving forward, the Michigan Wild Rice Initiative, which is working together with a stewardship plan between the tribes and the state and federal agencies to come and be able to uh, manage these beds that are across and growing in the across Michigan. There's another YouTube video there, why Manoomin is so expensive. This actually was done by the BBC. There's a thing there on YouTube, discovering wild rice. There's actually two videos on there. And then there's some books there again, Bart Barton's and Richard Horan. There's a chapter in there on wild rice too. So, and the Native Wild Rice Coalition actually was actually put in 2006 when the tribe, or actually Lac Butte Desert, hosted a wild rice symposium or conference, and so out of that, the Native Wild Rice Coalition was formed, and from that coalition, that one of the goals and objectives of the coalition was to start sharing and doing education and outreach. And 2 years after that, in 2000, the conference was in 2006 and 2008. Lac Butte Desert hosted the first wild rice camp, and has been hosting wild rice camps ever since 2008. So we're working towards the wild rice camp here for 2023. So with that, I want to say miigwech, which is thank you. So, there are a lot of things, and, especially on that last slide where you can do it. And if you really have a lot more questions, you can go to one of the 12 federally recognized tribes in the state of Michigan. If you're interested in learning how to do the restoration, how to do the monitoring, how you can help identify wild rice, and doing a lot of these things with both the coalition and the initiative and the tribes. They very welcome volunteers to assist in moving forward with that. And one of the things we didn't put on this was how they could reach us, but but maybe we can add that in the edits to whatever. We'll share that contact information. I mean, in that last one in miigwech, maybe we should put our email addresses.
Probably should. Probably should. But yeah, we are so glad to be able to be here and to speak about the rice. And Roger and I are always, once we get you our contact information, we are always available for questions. And I encourage you to get out to a rice camp, to get involved, and to just get out into the land and become a part of it, because I did that probably 10 years ago, and I've been immersed in wild rice ever since, and just very grateful for the understandings that I've gained from it, and from my friendship with Roger and everybody else who is attached to rice. It is a beautiful community. So very grateful to share.
Yeah, it was an honor, and it was great to be able to share this information or this resource, or even maybe introduce you to this resource. Um, with that, again, I want to say thank you for taking the time out to view this video. And again, we will share our contact information.